Hello and welcome. You know the names of gods that mortals pray to in temples of marble and gold. You know the devils who scheme in the 9 hells, the demons who rage in the abyss, the archfey who dance in twilight courts. But there is one name that even the gods themselves whisper only in the most secure sanctums, behind wards so powerful they could shatter lesser minds. There is one entity whose very existence is a wound in reality, a thing so profoundly wrong that good and evil, law and chaos, all put aside eons of conflict to imprison it together. This is not a god you pray to. This is not a devil you bargain with. This is the thing that makes gods wake screaming in the night, if gods could truly sleep. This is Tharizdun, the Chained Oblivion, and his story is one that reality itself tried to forget. Your world exists because of chains. Not metaphorical chains, not philosophical constraints, but actual divine shackles forged from the combined will of the gods, wrapped around something that should never have been allowed to think, to want, to hunger, somewhere beyond the reach of most mortals, deeper than the deepest hell, sealed away in a prison that exists in multiple tellings, in the depths of the abyss itself, or in a pocket of destroyed reality. There is something, and in that prison it writhes. It remembers, it waits. Tharizdun is not simply evil. Evil implies a perspective, a point of view, a reason however twisted. A devil wants power. A demon wants destruction. A lick wants immortality. But Tharizdun wants something far more fundamental and far more terrifying. He wants the universe to stop existing. Not to rule it, not to corrupt it, not to transform it into his image. He wants everything, absolutely everything, to return to nothing. He is entropy given consciousness, the heat death of the universe given divine power, the mathematical certainty that all things must end given a will to make that end come sooner. He is the anti-creation, the inverse of existence itself. The names mortals give him barely scratch the surface of what he is. The Chained Oblivion, the dark god, the elder elemental eye, the patient one, he who waits in darkness, the forgotten god, the chained god, the mad god. Each name captures a fragment of truth. He is chained because he must be. He is oblivion because that is what he seeks for all things. He is patient because time means nothing to something that exists outside its normal flow. He is mad, though this could imply that his insanity is the result of what he saw, what corrupted him, rather than something inherent to his original nature. He is forgotten because even remembering him is dangerous, because knowledge of him is a contagion that spreads madness like plague. In the cosmology of your world, gods have portfolios, domains, spheres of influence. The god of war oversees conflict. The god of death guides souls to their rest. The god of magic maintains the weave of arcane power. But Tharizdun's domain is the absence of all domains. His portfolio is the ending of all portfolios. Based on what scholars have pieced together from fragmented records, he appears to be a god of entropy and madness, but entropy twisted from its natural role into something apocalyptic, while other gods create, maintain, or even destroy to make room for new creation. Tharizdun seeks only final, absolute, eternal nothing. You need to understand something fundamental about how gods work in most worlds. Gods need worship. They need belief. They need prayers and temples and faithful congregations. Their power, in many cosmologies, is directly tied to the number and fervor of their worshippers. This creates a certain balance, a cosmic equilibrium. Gods compete for followers, yes, but they also need the world to exist for those followers to live in. Even the most destructive evil deity understands that you cannot rule over nothing, cannot be feared by nothing, cannot be worshipped by nothing. But Tharizdun broke this rule. He existed before it, or perhaps he exists outside it. His power does not appear to come from worship in the traditional sense. His strength seems to derive from something more fundamental, woven into the fabric of reality as its opposite. He is the shadow that existence casts, simply by existing. The few texts that dare mention him describe his appearance in ways that make scholars weep with frustration at their own inadequacy. How do you describe something that the mind refuses to fully perceive? Those who claim to have seen manifestations of his power, those who survived with their sanity mostly intact, speak of darkness that is more than the absence of light. They describe a presence that makes reality feel thin, fragile, like paper about to tear. Some see chains, massive beyond comprehension, wrapped around a shape that cannot be fully perceived. Others see eyes, countless eyes, opening in the void, each one containing not malice, but something worse. Indifference, complete, total, cosmic indifference to all things. His symbols, used by his most demented cultists, reflect this nature. A dark spiral descending into nothingness. An inverted pyramid or triangle, representing the reversal of creation's ascent. Chains, sometimes broken or about to break. And always, always, the color purple shot through with sickly yellow and black. The colors of deep bruising, of reality damaged and wrong. These symbols appear in places of great calamity, in ruins where civilizations died screaming, in caverns that delve too deep and find things better left undiscovered. When you encounter references to the elder elemental eye, you are touching the edges of Tharizdun's influence. This appears to be either one of his aspects or a persona he created during periods of lucidity, though the exact relationship varies depending on which ancient texts you consult. The elder elemental eye represents his connection to the primordial chaos, the raw elemental forces that existed before creation was ordered into a cosmos. But where elemental power is usually neutral, capable of destruction and creation alike, the elder elemental eye version is purely destructive. This could imply that he corrupted the very concept of elemental power, turning it from creative chaos into annihilating entropy. It is fire that burns without warmth, water that drowns without cleansing, earth that buries without nurturing, air that suffocates without breath. It is the elements turned against the purpose of existence itself. The cults that worship him, and yes, despite everything, such cults exist, do not worship him for power or favor. They worship him because they have been touched by his madness and found in it a terrible truth. They have looked into the void and seen, or think they have seen, that all the struggles of existence are meaningless. All the wars, all the love, all the art and music and striving and hoping, all of it is just a temporary aberration in an eternal nothing. They worship him because they want to help existence remember what it was before it became nothing. They are not trying to gain his favor. They are trying to be his instruments. They are the cancer trying to kill its host, knowing that it dies too, but finding in that mutual annihilation a kind of dark peace. His influence seeps out even through his imprisonment. This is perhaps the most terrifying thing about Tharizdun. Even bound, even chained by the combined might of the gods during the ancient conflict known as the Dawn War, he still affects the world. The chains hold his body, his direct power, his ability to act openly. But they cannot completely seal away his influence. Based on the persistence of his cults and the recurring threats to his prison throughout the ages, we can assume that reality itself is corrupted by his mere existence. The fact that entropy exists, that things decay and die and fall apart, that information becomes noise, and order becomes chaos. These fundamental laws of your universe might be connected to his presence. He does not need to act to destroy. He only needs to be, and destruction follows. Madness is another manifestation of his influence. Not all madness, not the simple breaking of a mind under stress, but the specific kind of madness that makes scholars who study forbidden knowledge suddenly understand that meaning is an illusion. The madness that makes artists create works so disturbing that those who view them are never quite the same. The madness that makes philosophers realize that consciousness itself might be the greatest cosmic mistake. This is the madness of Tharizdun, the enlightenment that is actually darkness, the understanding that unmakes the mind that achieves it. In the hierarchy of threats to existence, Tharizdun sits alone at the apex. Demon lords want to spread chaos and destruction, but they want to exist while doing it. Archdevils want to corrupt souls and rule through tyranny, but they need those souls and that realm to rule. Even the far realm entities, alien and incomprehensible as they are, seem to want to transform reality rather than end it. But Tharizdun wants none of these things. He precedes them, or at minimum, he encompasses them. He is the final answer to all questions, the solution that solves by erasing the problem, and everything else along with it. You might wonder how such a being came to be, or why the universe would allow such an entity to exist. These questions assume that existence is rational, that it has safeguards, that it makes sense. But Tharizdun's existence suggests that reality is more fragile than most dare to believe. based on what fragments of divine history have survived. He was not always what he is now. Something changed him, corrupted him, turned him from whatever he was into this apocalyptic force. This suggests that even gods are not immune to corruption, that even divine beings can be twisted into something monstrous. His prison, therefore, is not a solution. It is a delay. It is not permanent, because nothing is permanent, not even the combined will of all gods. It is a way of pushing the problem into the future, of making it someone else's crisis to manage. Every god knows this. Every god who participated in his chaining understands that they did not solve the problem of Tharizdun. They merely contained it, and containment is not victory. It is just not yet losing. The weight of this knowledge sits heavy on the divine realm. There are councils of gods, regular meetings, where deities who would normally be at each other's throats sit together in uncomfortable unity. They do not discuss doctrine or territory or worship. They discuss the chains. They verify that the seals hold. They pour more divine energy into the prison, maintaining what their predecessors built. And they wonder, always wonder, what will happen when one day, inevitably, something goes wrong. Because in an infinite timeline, all possible events eventually occur. And one of those possible events is Tharizdun breaking free. Mortals in your world go about their lives largely ignorant of this cosmic sword hanging over all existence. They worry about their crops, their families, their local politics, their national wars. They pray to their gods for good harvests and successful ventures and victory in battle. And the gods listen and respond and grant spells and perform minor miracles, but always, in the back of every divine mind, there is the awareness of the chains. There is the knowledge that all their petty conflicts with each other are infinitely less important than the one thing they all agree on. Tharizdun must never be free. The dark god's nature makes him unique among all entities in the multiverse. You cannot bargain with him because he wants nothing you can offer. You cannot appease him because he wants everything to end, including himself. You cannot understand him completely because to truly understand would be to go mad with the realization. You can only oppose him, contain him, delay him, and hope that somehow, against all logic and probability, the chains hold forever. Even though forever is a very long time and chains, even divine ones, were not meant to last eternally. Section 2. The Age of Creation and the Great Betrayal. Before the world you know existed, before mortals walked under stars, before even the gods had fully established their domains, there was a time of conflict and creation. This era, known in some cosmologies as the Dawn War, was not a single moment, but an age, a period when primordial beings of elemental chaos clashed with gods who sought to bring order and structure to existence. And in that age, Tharizdun was present, not as a prisoner, not as a chained horror whispered about in fearful tones, The fragmentary records that survive suggest he was among the divine forces, though what exactly he was, what role he played, the texts disagree on these details. The creation myths vary across cultures and worlds, but certain elements appear consistently. There was chaos, raw and unformed. There were primordial beings embodying that chaos, vast entities of elemental power. There were gods, whether born from that chaos or existing before it, depending on which theology you follow. And these gods began the work of shaping chaos into cosmos, of bringing order to disorder, of creating the conditions where life could eventually flourish. Based on what we can piece together from different sources, Tharizdun appears to have been present during this time, though his exact allegiance remains unclear in some tellings. But something fundamental differentiated Tharizdun from the beginning. While other gods seemed energized by the work of creation, seemed to take satisfaction in bringing forth new things, observers noted in the fragments of divine history that survive that Tharizdun approached matters with a strange quality. Some texts suggest he was already a god of entropy and madness, though whether this was his original nature or something that developed later is a matter of theological debate. What seems consistent across sources is that he was different, set apart, as if waiting for something that only he could perceive. The multiverse in its infancy was a different place than it is now. The planes of existence were not as firmly separated. The boundaries between the material world and the outer planes, between the elemental chaos and ordered reality, these boundaries were thin, permeable, constantly shifting. It was a time of great power and great danger, when cosmic forces clashed and reality itself was malleable. And in this fluid, dangerous reality, discoveries were constantly being made. The divine beings and primordials were learning the rules of existence, or perhaps creating them, finding the limits of possibility by pushing against them. Tharizdun made a discovery, or perhaps the discovery made him. The sequence of cause and effect becomes murky when dealing with events that predate most cosmic history. According to some versions of the lore, particularly those from the Forgotten Realms cosmology, he found or was drawn to a place called the Living Gate. This was not a gate in any physical sense. It was a thin point in reality, a flaw or weakness in the barrier between existence and the far realm. That alien dimension of madness that exists outside normal reality. Through this gate, or because of it, Tharizdun encountered something that changed him forever. What exactly he encountered varies, depending on which texts you consult. Some sources call it the shard of ultimate evil, or the shard of pure evil. Others describe it as a seed of darkness or a fragment of oblivion. Based on what we can gather from these various accounts, it appears to have been something ancient, something that predated the current order of reality, perhaps a remnant from before creation, or from outside creation entirely. This could imply that it was not created by any god or primordial, but existed independently. A piece of anti-existence that somehow survived into the era of being. When Tharizdun encountered this shard, this seed, this fragment, something fundamental changed in his nature. The texts suggest that what had been entropy in its proper role, the natural decay that makes room for new growth, became entropy as total annihilation. What had been madness as divine mystery became madness as cosmic horror. Tharizdun, or the being who would become Tharizdun as we know him, was corrupted. Not corrupted in the sense of being tempted or persuaded, but corrupted in the sense of being fundamentally altered, rewritten at the level of divine essence. The corruption was not instantaneous, based on what fragmentary records suggest. Tharizdun began to withdraw from whatever councils or gatherings the divine beings held. He stopped participating in the work of creation, or participated differently, with strange purpose. When questioned, accounts suggest he gave vague answers about pursuing his own projects, exploring the boundaries of possibility. The other gods and primordials, busy with their own conflicts in the Dawn War, did not immediately recognize the danger. This would prove to be a catastrophic mistake. What Tharizdun did during this period of withdrawal is the subject of much theological debate and horrified speculation. One thing seems consistent across multiple sources. He did not simply contemplate. He acted, he experimented, and most significantly, he began to corrupt reality itself, spreading the influence of whatever had changed him throughout the emerging cosmos. The abyss, that infinite plane of chaos and evil that would become home to demons beyond counting, has origins that multiple sources trace back to Tharizdun's actions during this period. Some accounts suggest he created it. Others indicate he found a pocket of extreme chaos and corrupted it with the shard's power. Still others describe him as seeding something within the abyss that caused it to grow and spawn monstrous life. The exact mechanism varies, but the connection between Tharizdun and the abyss's transformation into a realm of ultimate evil appears consistently in the lore. This suggests he planted something, some essence of the corruption that had changed him, deep within this pocket of chaos, and it grew like cancer, spreading and metastasizing, creating layer after layer of hellish landscape. The demons that emerged from the abyss, particularly the ancient ones known as Obiriths, were not created by Tharizdun in any direct sense. Based on what scholars have pieced together, they evolved or spawned or manifested from the chaotic evil energy that his corruption produced. But they bore his mark nonetheless. The mindless destructiveness of the lowest demons, the sophisticated cruelty of the demon lords, all of it reflected the fundamental nature of what Tharizdun had become. They were chaos given form, but chaos bent toward destruction rather than neutral randomness. Other gods began to notice strange occurrences throughout the emerging cosmos. Reality developed soft spots, places where the laws of nature seem to fail or operate unpredictably. This could imply that Tharizdun's corruption was not limited to the abyss, but was spreading throughout the planar structure, weakening the fabric of reality itself. The effects were subtle at first, easy to dismiss as natural fluctuations in a young cosmos still finding its stability, but they accumulated, and eventually some gods became concerned enough to investigate. The accounts of what happened next vary significantly depending on which source you consult. Some texts describe gods confronting Tharizdun and being disturbed by what they found. Others suggest he was working towards some great ritual or working of power. What seems consistent is that at some point, the other gods realized Tharizdun had become a threat not just to their individual interests, but to existence itself. He was not simply another combatant in the Dawn War. He was something far more dangerous. The exact nature of his plan remains unclear in most sources. Some texts suggest he was working to unmake creation, to reverse the process that had brought order from chaos. Others describe him attempting to spread the abyss's corruption across all planes. Still, others hint at something involving the far realm, perhaps trying to merge reality with that alien dimension. What scholars generally agree on, based on the evidence of what followed, is that his plan was apocalyptic in scope. Whatever he intended to do would have ended or fundamentally destroyed existence as it was taking shape. The gods' reaction was unprecedented. Deities who had been enemies in the Dawn War, who had fought each other over fundamental principles of how reality should be ordered, suddenly found common cause. Some accounts suggest even primordials, those elemental beings who had opposed the gods, joined the alliance against Tharizdun. Faced with the prospect of total annihilation, not just of themselves, but of the very concept of existence, all other conflicts became meaningless. There was only one meaningful division now: those who wanted existence to continue, and Tharizdun. The preparations for confrontation began. Based on what we know from various mythological accounts, the gods could not let Tharizdun know they were organizing against him, could not let him realize they had discovered the full extent of his plans. If he felt threatened, he might accelerate his timeline, might attempt whatever apocalyptic working he was preparing before they were ready to stop him. So they gathered their power quietly, forming alliances in hushed conversations, preparing for a conflict that would determine whether reality itself would survive. What followed was not war in any traditional sense. Wars have sides that both want to achieve something within the context of continued existence. But what happened when the gods finally confronted Tharizdun was existence defending itself against something that wanted existence to end. Different sources describe this confrontation differently. Some place it as part of the larger Dawn War. Others describe it as a separate conflict entirely. What seems consistent is that it was catastrophic in scale, a battle that shook the foundations of reality. Tharizdun did not go quietly. The power he had gained from whatever had corrupted him made him formidable beyond measure. Some accounts suggest he was a match for multiple gods at once. The corruption he had spread throughout creation gave him advantages, ways to twist reality against his opponents. And most terrifyingly, various sources suggest he came close to succeeding in whatever he was attempting. Reality itself was in danger of unraveling. The gods threw everything they had at stopping him. Based on the fragmentary accounts that survive, divine powers that had been secret were unleashed. Artifacts of incredible power were created and expended in single attacks. Some sources suggest that gods died, truly died, in this conflict. The cosmos shook with the force of powers being used at a scale that had never been imagined. This was not simply a battle. It was a struggle for the right of reality to exist at all. And slowly, paying a terrible price, the assembled forces of existence began to prevail. Not because they were individually stronger than Tharizdun, but because there were more of them, because they could coordinate while he stood alone. The texts suggest they disrupted whatever working he was attempting. They broke his connection to the source of his power, or at least weakened it significantly. They wounded him in ways that would take even a god immense time to recover from. But they could not kill him. This realization appears consistently across multiple sources. Death, as traditionally understood, could not contain what Tharizdun had become. Some texts suggest he had become too aligned with non-existence for normal death to hold him. Others indicate that killing him might actually accomplish his goals, returning him to the nothing he sought. What scholars generally agree on is that the gods faced a terrible problem. They had defeated Tharizdun, but they could not end him permanently. The solution they devised was born of desperation. They would not kill him. They would imprison him, but not in any normal prison, any physical location he could eventually escape from. They would create a prison beyond prisons, using their own divine essence as the substance of his chains. The exact details vary across sources. Some describe the prison as being in the abyss itself, in the deepest parts of that corrupt realm he had helped create. Others place it in a pocket dimension created specifically to hold him. Still others suggest it exists everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, sealed away from normal reality. The ritual to imprison Tharizdun took everything the gods had left. Each deity contributed a portion of their divine essence, permanently weakening themselves. Some gods who had survived the battle did not survive the imprisonment ritual, burning out completely as they gave everything to forge the chains. Others were diminished, losing domains or powers they would never regain. The cost was catastrophic, but the alternative, based on what they had seen of his plans, was worse. When it was done, when the last chain was forged and the final seal was placed, the gods looked at what they had created. They had won, but at such cost that reality would never be the same. And worst of all, they understood a fundamental truth. Chains can weaken. Prisons can fail. Seals can degrade over time. They had not solved the problem of Tharizdun. They had only delayed it, pushed it into the future, made it a burden that would have to be maintained forever. And that knowledge, that certainty that this imprisonment required eternal vigilance, would shape divine existence for all the ages to come. Section 3. The Divine War and the Chaining. The prison they built for Tharizdun was not a place in any conventional sense. You cannot travel to it by walking or flying or teleporting. Based on what the texts describe, the exact location varies depending on which source you consult. Some accounts place it deep within the abyss itself, in the very realm his corruption helped create. A twisted irony that his prison lies within his own work. Other sources describe a pocket dimension carved from nothing, existing outside the normal topology of the multiverse. Still, others suggest it is everywhere and nowhere. A prison that touches all planes but belongs to none. What seems consistent across these varied accounts is that distance and location function differently when describing where Tharizdun is held. The chains themselves were forged from divine essence, a sacrifice that permanently weakened the gods who contributed to them. Each deity who participated in the imprisonment gave up something fundamental to their nature. The texts are not specific about what exactly was sacrificed, but the implications are clear. The gods paid a price that left them diminished, a wound that would never heal. Every chain link represents this sacrifice. Divine power crystallized into binding that could hold a being of Tharizdun's magnitude. The physical manifestation of these chains, if physical is even the right word, defies mortal comprehension according to those few accounts that dare describe them. They are said to be simultaneously massive, beyond imagination and binding, at every level of reality, based on what we can gather from fragmentary visions recorded by mad prophets and divine servants. The chains wrap around Tharizdun's essence at multiple levels of existence, binding not just his form, but his very consciousness, his ability to exert influence on the world. But chains alone would not be enough for a being of this power and nature. The gods, having learned from the difficulty of even defeating him, understood they needed multiple layers of containment. This could imply they built redundancy into the prison, ensuring that if one layer failed, others would still hold. The concept makes sense from a strategic perspective. You do not put all your faith in a single barrier when imprisoning something that threatened all existence. The outermost layer appears to be obscurity and enforced forgetting. The gods made the multiverse forget Tharizdun, or tried to. His name was removed from common religious texts. His symbols were erased from public temples. Stories about him were relegated to forbidden archives and secret libraries. This obscurity serves multiple purposes based on what scholars theorize. It prevents his cults from spreading easily, limits the number of minds thinking about him, and reduces the chance of someone accidentally weakening his prison through misguided research or summoning attempts. Another layer seems to be misdirection and false information. Various texts present contradictory information about Tharizdun. Some claim he was destroyed rather than imprisoned. Others present him as a myth or cautionary tale. Still others misidentify him or confuse his nature. This could imply a deliberate strategy by the gods to make finding the truth about him as difficult as possible. If you cannot find accurate information, you cannot effectively work to free him or tap into his power. Divine guardianship appears to be another crucial layer. Based on what we can infer from religious texts and divine mandates, certain gods or their servants maintain constant vigilance over the prison. They monitor the chains, watch for any weakening, immediately work to shore up any degradation they detect. This suggests the prison is not self-maintaining, but requires active, ongoing divine effort to keep functional. The prison's location or nature makes it difficult to find or access based on the various descriptions. Whether it exists in a pocket dimension, deep in the abyss, or in some other configuration, reaching it appears to be nearly impossible for mortals, and difficult even for immortals. This isolation serves as protection, keeping would-be rescuers or curious seekers away from something they should not be able to reach. The chains themselves are described as dynamic rather than static in some accounts. This could imply they shift and change their configuration, making it harder for Tharizdun to study them and find weaknesses. A prison that adapts and varies its structure would be more secure than one that remains constant and predictable over eons of time. Some sources suggest the prison is designed to contain and filter Tharizdun's corrupting influence. The chains catch the seepage of madness and entropy, preventing it from flowing freely into the wider multiverse. But no filter is perfect. Some corruption must escape, must seep through, or the pressure would build to catastrophic levels. This would explain why Tharizdun's influence still touches the world despite his imprisonment. The chains are releasing small amounts deliberately, a controlled leak to prevent explosive failure. There are also hints in certain theological texts of conceptual binding, ways the gods tried to trap Tharizdun not just physically, but philosophically. The exact mechanisms remain unclear, but the concept suggests they tried to bind him at the level of ideas and concepts, not just matter and energy. This makes sense when dealing with a divine being. Physical chains alone might not suffice. But even with all these layers, all these precautions, all this divine power devoted to his containment, the sources consistently suggest a troubling truth. The prison is not permanent. Nothing is truly permanent when dealing with infinite time. The chains are weakening, slowly but measurably. The gods pour more power into them, shore them up, reinforce the weak points, but they are fighting against entropy itself, and Tharizdun embodies that force. You cannot win a fight against the fundamental nature of reality. You can only delay your loss. The cost of creating and maintaining this prison has fundamentally shaped the divine landscape. Gods who might have been great powers became lesser deities because they gave too much of themselves to the chains. Some sources suggest entire divine domains disappeared because the gods who embodied them sacrificed everything in the imprisonment. The relationships between gods are defined in part by the Great Alliance against Tharizdun. Ancient enemies maintain truces because they remember fighting side by side against oblivion. The mortal cost is rarely discussed in the texts, but there are hints that suggest it was catastrophic. The energy required for the imprisonment ritual came from divine essence. Yes, but some sources imply it also drew on other powers, other sources, based on what we can infer from gaps in historical records and archaeological evidence of suddenly ended civilizations. There may have been a terrible price paid by mortals as well, though the details remain unclear and possibly deliberately obscured. In the immediate aftermath of Tharizdun's imprisonment, the multiverse was wounded. The battle and the imprisonment had scarred reality. There were regions where the laws of nature did not quite work correctly, where the damage from the conflict had left permanent marks. Some of these scars appear to exist to the current day, known as cursed lands or places where magic behaves strangely. These could be the wounds from the war against Tharizdun, damage that even divine power could not or has not yet fully healed. The gods who survived, diminished and exhausted, faced the task of continuing or completing creation. The work of shaping the cosmos had been interrupted by the crisis of Tharizdun. Now they had to resume that work, but they were weaker, fewer in number, and burdened with the ongoing need to maintain the prison. This suggests that the cosmos that eventually emerged was different from what it might have been without this catastrophe. The demons spawned by Tharizdun's corruption of the abyss posed an immediate problem. With their creator imprisoned, they were leaderless, but not destroyed. The gods had to deal with them as a separate crisis, containing the abyss, trying to limit the demons' ability to spread into other planes. This led to the creation of additional cosmic structures and barriers, suggesting that much of the current planar system was designed partially around containing the consequences of Tharizdun's actions. Knowledge of what had happened, the full truth of the conflict and imprisonment, was deemed too dangerous to spread freely. The gods made a collective decision to obscure the details, based on how fragmented and contradictory the surviving accounts are. They created edited versions of events, myths that contained pieces of truth, but left out the most disturbing details. This created a class of secret knowledge, lore that was deliberately hidden, accessible only to the highest ranks of certain priesthoods, or to scholars willing to risk divine displeasure. The gods also had to address Tharizdun's followers. Not all beings corrupted by him had died in the conflict. Some cultists survived, scattered across the plains, still devoted to their imprisoned master. Hunting them down became a priority, but not all could be found. Some went into hiding, passed their knowledge down in secret, waited for their chance to act. The gods established orders of divine warriors and inquisitors, specifically tasked with finding and eliminating Tharizdun's followers. This work continues to the present day in many worlds. The prison itself required eternal vigilance, and the sources consistently mention this. The gods established systems of watchfulness, ways to monitor the chains and alert each other if something went wrong. They built redundancy into every aspect they could because they understood that failure was not an option. If Tharizdun ever escaped, there might not be enough divine power left to imprison him again. The first imprisonment had cost too much. As ages passed, the immediate crisis faded into history. New gods arose who had not been present for the conflict. These younger deities learned about Tharizdun through teaching from the elder gods, but they lacked the visceral understanding that comes from facing such a threat directly. This created tension within the divine community. Based on what we can infer from theological debates recorded in various texts, the older gods insisted on maintaining maximum security and vigilance. The younger gods sometimes questioned whether all the precautions were truly necessary. The structure of the prison means that connections to it might exist throughout the multiverse without most beings realizing it. There could be artifacts that served as focuses during the imprisonment ritual. There might be locations that sit on lines of power that feed into the prison. There could be individuals who carry within them fragments of the divine essence used to forge the chains. All of these things would be dangerous, not because they directly threaten to free Tharizdun, but because they could potentially be used by those who understand what they are to weaken the prison's defenses. The true horror of Tharizdun's imprisonment is not that it exists, but that it must be maintained forever. And forever is a very long time for even gods to contemplate. Every moment of every day, for all eternity, divine power must be devoted to keeping him contained. It is a burden that can never be set down without catastrophic consequences. The gods chose this burden willingly. Understanding the alternative was the end of existence itself. But that does not make the weight any easier to bear. And it does not change the fundamental truth that weighs on every divine consciousness that knows the full story. The chains will not hold forever. And when they eventually fail, there may not be enough power left in the cosmos to forge them anew. Section 4. Echoes in chains, cults, and artifacts. The chains hold Tharizdun's body, his direct manifestation, his ability to act openly in the world. But influence is not action. Corruption is not movement. And madness does not require physical presence, even bound beyond the reach of mortal or immortal seeking. Even imprisoned in whatever configuration the gods created, Tharizdun's presence bleeds into reality. It seeps through the cracks, whispers through the silence, touches minds that wander too far into forbidden knowledge. Imprisoning a god of this magnitude is like trying to contain radiation with a lead box. The box works mostly, but some particles always get through. Some contamination always escapes. His followers are the most visible manifestation of this escaped influence. They exist across every age, in every era, scattered throughout civilizations that think they are safe from ancient evils. These are not people born into evil or forced into darkness. They are individuals who somehow, through study or chance or terrible misfortune, touched the edges of Tharizdun's consciousness and were changed by the contact. Some were scholars researching forbidden topics. Others were priests who delved too deep into mysteries their gods warned them away from. Still others were simply unfortunate souls who found ancient artifacts or wandered into cursed places where Tharizdun's influence pooled like stagnant water. The transformation is insidious because it feels like enlightenment. You do not become a follower of Tharizdun through temptation, with promises of power or threats of punishment, based on accounts from those who have interrogated captured cultists. You become his follower because you touch his consciousness. And suddenly, everything makes terrible sense. All the struggles of existence, all the pain and effort and hoping and striving, it all seems absurd when viewed from the perspective of entropy. Why fight against the inevitable? Why build when everything eventually crumbles? Why love when everyone dies? Why create when creation itself is temporary? These thoughts are not inherently wrong. Philosophers have grappled with them for millennia. But when they come from contact with Tharizdun, they carry with them a solution. Stop resisting, embrace the end, help it come sooner. The cults that form around this dark revelation are not like other evil cults you might encounter. A cult of a demon lord wants to spread chaos and destruction because their patron enjoys it. A cult of a devil wants to corrupt souls because that serves their master's schemes. But cults of Tharizdun want nothing for themselves. They seek no reward, no paradise after death, no favor from their imprisoned god. They work toward his freedom and the subsequent end of all things because they genuinely believe it is the right thing to do. This could imply they see themselves as mercy killers on a cosmic scale, ending what they perceive as the suffering of existence itself. The most famous of these cults, the one that has appeared and reappeared throughout history under different names, is known as the cult of the Elder Elemental Eye. This name reflects one of Tharizdun's aspects or personas, his connection to primordial elemental chaos. The cultists use this aspect as a cover, a way to disguise their true purpose. They present themselves as worshippers of elemental power, dangerous perhaps, but understandable within the framework of normal religion. But this is misdirection. The elemental aspect is just the door through which they enter. Behind it lies something far more terrible. The temple of elemental evil, documented in various historical accounts and adventurer reports, stands as perhaps the most infamous site associated with this cult, located in the region of Greyhawk. This temple served as a stronghold for followers who worked under the guise of elemental worship, while actually serving Tharizdun's apocalyptic purpose. The temple's history spans multiple risings and fallings, with adventurers defeating the cult only to have it resurface years or decades later. This persistence suggests that Tharizdun's influence, once established in a location, is difficult to fully eradicate. These cults operate in cells, isolated groups that often do not know about each other. This structure exists partially for security, to prevent authorities from rolling up the entire organization if one cell is discovered, but it also exists, based on what we can infer from captured cult documents, because Tharizdun's influence spreads independently. You do not need to be recruited into his cult in any traditional sense. You just need to touch the wrong knowledge. And suddenly you understand. And suddenly you are working toward the same goals as every other cultist without needing coordination or communication. The rituals these cults perform are designed to weaken the chains, to erode the prison's defenses bit by bit. No single ritual will free Tharizdun. The cultists understand this. Based on confiscated ritual texts, they know they are working on a project that might take thousands of years, that they personally will never see the fruits of their labor. But this does not discourage them. Time is meaningless when you are working toward eternity's end. Each ritual creates a tiny crack in one chain. Each sacrifice adds microscopic stress to one seal. Over centuries, these accumulate. The cracks spread, the stress builds, and the prison weakens incrementally but inevitably. The sacrifices these cults make take various forms according to historical records. Sometimes they are traditional blood sacrifices, offerings of life to power dark rituals. But other accounts describe stranger sacrifices. They perform rituals that seem designed to drain meaning from things, to corrupt moments of joy into emptiness, to undermine the foundations of reality through philosophical erosion rather than direct violence. This suggests they are attacking existence at multiple levels, not just the physical, but the conceptual. Throughout history, there have been several notable attempts to free Tharizdun, moments when his cults came dangerously close to success. Historical records, where they exist and have not been deliberately expunged, hint at catastrophic incidents where entire regions were devastated by events connected to Tharizdun's followers. One such attempt appears to have involved powerful wizards who discovered what they believed was a weak point in the prison's structure. They gathered artifacts of immense power and began to unravel the bindings at that location. The gods noticed, but perhaps too late. The backlash from their intervention and the partial success of the ritual destroyed the entire region so thoroughly that even identifying exactly when and where it happened has become difficult for scholars. Another documented attempt occurred during a period when planar boundaries were naturally weakened. A cult performed synchronized rituals across multiple planes simultaneously, attempting to create a resonance that would shatter several chains at once. They nearly succeeded, based on accounts of reality unraveling in the regions where they worked. Time stopped flowing properly. Space became impossible. Mortals in nearby areas reported experiencing things that should not exist. The gods had to intervene directly, a rare occurrence that itself suggests how close this attempt came to success. The artifacts associated with Tharizdun are objects of terrible power and even more terrible danger. Some might be fragments of the original corruption that changed him. Others could be tools he created before his imprisonment. Still others might simply be objects soaked in his influence for so long they have become extensions of his will. What historical records and artifact catalogs make clear is that all of them are dangerous beyond measure and should be destroyed if possible, sealed away if destruction proves impossible. Various texts reference artifacts by different names, making it difficult to determine how many unique items exist versus how many names refer to the same objects. References appear to items called the Dark Spiral Amulet, various fragments described as pieces of chains or shards of dark power, and texts containing corrupted knowledge. The exact properties of these artifacts vary in the accounts, but certain patterns emerge. They tend to corrupt those who use them. They provide power, but at a cost to sanity or soul. They create connections to Tharizdun that work in both directions, allowing him to become aware of the wielder. One category of artifact that appears consistently across sources is ritual texts, grimoires, and codices that contain knowledge of Tharizdun and instructions for rituals to weaken his prison or tap into his power. These texts are particularly insidious because knowledge can be copied, shared, preserved even when physical objects are destroyed. A book might be burned, but if someone read it and remembered the contents, the knowledge survives. This makes controlling these artifacts significantly more difficult than controlling physical objects like weapons or jewelry. There are locations in the world that serve as weak points in reality, places where Tharizdun's influence seeps through more easily. These are not necessarily places connected to his cults, though cults often seek them out. They are simply geographical or planar spots where the prison's containment is thinner. Some are in obvious places based on the pattern: deep underground caverns, isolated mountain peaks, ocean trenches. Others appear to be in seemingly random locations, which suggests Either we do not understand the full pattern, or the distribution is truly random, perhaps based on where damage occurred during the original battle and imprisonment. People who spend time near these weak points, even unknowingly, often develop strange symptoms according to medical and theological texts. They report dreams of chains. They experience moments of profound meaninglessness, times when everything seems hollow and purposeless. They might develop an obsession with entropy, with decay, with the endings of things. Most shake off these influences once they leave the area, but some do not. Some are changed permanently. They become what are sometimes called the touched, individuals who carry within them a fragment of Tharizdun's influence without being fully corrupted by it. The gods watch for signs of Tharizdun's influence in the world, and they have taught their clergy to do the same. There are indicators, patterns that suggest his cults are active in a region, an increase in nihilistic philosophy among scholars, a rise in suicides that seem to come from intellectual conviction rather than emotional distress, reports of purple and yellow lights or symbols appearing in unexpected places, artifacts going missing from secure vaults, prisoners reporting dreams of being chained. Any of these alone might be coincidence, but when multiple indicators appear together, divine agents are dispatched to investigate. These divine agents, drawn from the most faithful and mentally resilient members of various priesthoods, do dangerous work. They hunt Tharizdun's cults knowing that mere exposure to the cultists' arguments could corrupt them. They investigate sites of suspected influence, knowing that what they find might break their minds. They destroy artifacts knowing that touching such objects creates a connection to the chained god himself. The failure rate is high based on what records exist. Many agents are lost, not to violence, but to corruption. In recent centuries, there has been a disturbing trend noted by those who track such things. The frequency of Tharizdun-related incidents appears to be increasing. More cults are being discovered. More artifacts are surfacing. More sites of influence are being identified. This could mean several things. His followers might be becoming more active, accelerating their efforts for some reason. But it could also mean something worse. It could indicate that the prison is weakening faster than before, that more of his influence is escaping through degrading seals. The gods are concerned, based on increased divine mandates and resources being directed toward monitoring the situation. Some scholars who study Tharizdun, the few who are allowed to know enough to theorize meaningfully, have proposed a terrifying possibility. What if the prison is not weakening by accident or inevitability? What if Tharizdun planned this from the beginning? He is described consistently as brilliant and patient, operating on timescales that make mortal lifespans meaningless. This leads to speculation. What if he allowed himself to be captured, knowing that the prison the gods built would eventually fail, and that when it did, they would be too weakened from maintaining it to imprison him again. This theory cannot be proven with available evidence, but it cannot be disproven either. And it fits what is known about Tharizdun's nature as the ultimate long-term planner. The various cult cells, the scattered artifacts, the weak points in reality, the increasing frequency of incidents. All of these paint a picture of a threat that has not diminished despite eons of imprisonment. If anything, based on the pattern of evidence, the threat appears to be growing. Whether this represents Tharizdun's deliberate strategy, the natural degradation of his prison, or simply better detection and recording of incidents that always occurred at this frequency, the result is the same. The chained god remains a clear and present danger to existence itself, and his influence continues to corrupt the world, even from behind divine shackles that were supposed to seal him away completely. Section 5. The Eternal Vigil and Cosmic Dread. The prison endures. Across eons, through cosmic upheavals and planar wars, despite the efforts of countless cults and the slow degradation of divine power, the chains still hold. Tharizdun remains imprisoned, sealed away in his impossible cage, separated from reality by layers of divine will and cosmic law. But endurance is not victory. Survival is not safety. Every god who knows the truth understands this, carries it like a weight that never lessens. The prison holds today. It will probably hold tomorrow. But eventually, inevitably, given enough time, all things fail. You live in a world shaped by this cosmic sword hanging over all existence. The gods who answer your prayers, who grant power to their clerics, who intervene in mortal affairs, they are doing so while part of their consciousness is always focused on those chains, based on what we can infer from the constant divine attention required to maintain the prison. Imagine trying to live your life while simultaneously holding up a massive weight that you can never set down. That appears to be divine existence in the age of Tharizdun's imprisonment. Every act of creation, every blessing granted, every prayer answered, it all happens while the gods are straining under the burden of keeping him contained. The current status of the prison is classified information of the highest order. Only the most senior members of certain priesthoods know the full details, based on the hierarchical structure of divine secrets. But fragments of truth leak out. Whispers passed between high priests, reports from divine agents, prophecies from oracles who see too much. From these fragments, a picture emerges, and it is not reassuring. The chains are holding, but they require more maintenance than they once did. The seals remain intact, but they demand more power to maintain. The prison still functions, but its integrity appears to be degrading at a rate that concerns even the most optimistic divine calculators. There are specific indicators that divine scholars track, based on references in theological texts to measurements and monitoring. The amount of divine power needed to maintain each seal, the rate at which Tharizdun's influence escapes into the wider multiverse. The number of cultist incidents per century, the stability of whatever anchor points tie the prison to reality, based on the increasing frequency of incidents and the growing concerns expressed in divine mandates. These metrics appear to be trending in the wrong direction. Not quickly. Nothing about Tharizdun happens quickly, but consistently, measurably, suggesting the prison is failing by degrees so small that individual mortals would never notice, but that add up to catastrophe over millennia. The gods meet in council more frequently now than they did in earlier ages, based on increased references to divine gatherings in recent theological texts. These are not the normal divine councils where they discuss mortal affairs and cosmic balance. These appear to be emergency sessions, urgent gatherings where the topic is always the same. What do we do when the prison fails? Not if it fails. When? Because they have run whatever calculations divine beings run, projected the trends, and the mathematics appear to be merciless. This suggests that at current rates of degradation, the prison will reach critical failure within a time frame that concerns even immortal beings. The contingency plans, based on what fragments have leaked through divine channels, are elaborate and desperate. Some theological debates reference building a second prison, starting now, so that when the first fails, they can immediately transfer Tharizdun to new containment. But this plan requires divine power, and that power is already stretched thin, maintaining the current prison. Building a second one would weaken the first, potentially causing it to fail sooner. Other discussions suggest gathering power, hoarding divine essence, preparing for a second imprisonment, ritual even more powerful than the first. But where would this power come from? The gods are already diminished from the first imprisonment. A third faction, smaller and more desperate based on how rarely these ideas appear in the texts, whispers about alternatives that border on the unthinkable. What if they could negotiate with Tharizdun? What if they could somehow convince him to remain imprisoned voluntarily? This faction is dismissed by most, but not quite silenced, because the alternative, fighting another war against him, is so terrible that even impossible solutions seem worth considering. But the fundamental question remains unanswered. How do you negotiate with entropy? How do you bargain with the embodiment of non-existence? There are prophecies, of course. When dealing with matters of cosmic importance, there are always prophecies. Oracles and seers across multiple worlds have spoken of Tharizdun's return, though their visions vary in detail and interpretation. Some describe a day when the stars go out one by one, when darkness reclaims the cosmos and existence folds back into nothing. Others speak of a great chain breaking with a sound like reality screaming, followed by silence more profound than any that has ever been. Still others describe a final battle between Tharizdun and all the forces of existence, a war that makes the first imprisonment look like a skirmish. the most disturbing prophecies are the ones that suggest Tharizdun's escape is not an ending, but a beginning. These visions describe him breaking free only to discover that imprisonment has changed him, that eons in chains have given him new perspectives or new powers. This could imply that the Tharizdun who eventually escapes might be even more dangerous than the one who was imprisoned, having had countless ages to contemplate, to plan, to prepare for his eventual freedom. Some prophecies mention heroes, mortal champions who will rise to oppose Tharizdun in his moment of freedom. These are the hopeful prophecies, the ones that suggest existence has a fighting chance. They describe adventurers of unprecedented power, wielding artifacts of legend, united across racial and ideological lines, standing against the dark god in a final confrontation. But even these hopeful visions carry troubling implications. The heroes might slow Tharizdun, might wound him, might even force him back into imprisonment temporarily, but they cannot kill him, based on the same fundamental problem the gods faced originally. Death is not an option for something that has become synonymous with ending itself. What would actually happen if Tharizdun escaped? The full answer is beyond mortal comprehension, but portions of it can be theorized based on what is known about his nature and power. The immediate effect would likely be reality destabilization. The prison is not just holding Tharizdun. It appears to be holding back the fundamental corruption his existence creates. When the chains break, that corruption would flood out all at once, spreading through the multiverse like poison through veins. Planes might begin to dissolve at their edges. The boundaries between different realities could blur and tear. Magic itself might become unreliable as the laws that govern it start to unravel. The next phase would be the return of his direct power. Tharizdun weakened and imprisoned is terrifying based on how much effort it takes to contain him. Tharizdun free and at full strength would be apocalyptic, based on accounts of what he accomplished before his imprisonment. He could potentially reshape entire planes with intention. He could unmake divine beings by willing them not to exist. He could corrupt the fundamental forces of reality, turning creation against itself. The gods would rally to fight him again, but they are weaker now than they were at the first imprisonment. Many who fought in that ancient war are gone, their essence spent maintaining the chains. The younger gods are powerful, but untested against a threat of this magnitude. This suggests that a second confrontation might not end as well as the first, might not end with imprisonment, but with something far worse. The mortal cost would be incalculable based on what we know of Tharizdun's goals and nature. Entire worlds might simply cease to exist as his attention falls upon them. Civilizations that took thousands of years to build would end in moments. The lucky would die quickly, existence snuffed out before they could process what was happening. The unlucky would be touched by his madness first, forced to understand what his followers understand before being released into non-being. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of Tharizdun's potential escape is not what he would do, but what he represents. His freedom would prove that existence is temporary, that all the struggles to maintain reality are ultimately futile, that entropy wins in the end. It would vindicate his philosophy, demonstrate that he was right all along about existence being temporary and doomed. This metaphysical victory might be more devastating than any physical destruction. It would remove hope, drain meaning, make every act of creation seem pointless, because creation itself was proven to be temporary. Your role in this cosmic drama might seem insignificant. You are mortal, finite, limited in power and understanding. What can one adventurer, or even a party of adventurers, do against a threat that makes gods tremble? But this perspective misses something crucial based on how reality appears to function. The gods are powerful but rigid, bound by cosmic laws and ancient agreements. Mortals are flexible. Mortals can go places and do things that gods cannot. Mortals can take risks that would be unacceptable for divine beings. Every cult you destroy, every artifact you secure, every ritual you interrupt, these actions matter. They buy time. They strengthen the chains indirectly by removing threats to them. There are hints scattered through ancient texts and divine revelations that Tharizdun's escape might be preventable in ways the gods have not considered. Some scholars theorize that the key lies not in strengthening the prison, but in changing Tharizdun himself. What if the corruption that changed him could be removed? What if he could be restored to what he was before he encountered whatever twisted him? This is almost certainly impossible based on how fundamental the corruption appears to be. The change seems too deep, too woven into his current nature. But impossible does not mean not worth attempting, especially when the alternative is the end of everything. Other theories suggest that the answer lies in understanding what corrupted him in the first place. If it was a fragment of something larger, perhaps that larger thing can be found and destroyed, weakening Tharizdun by removing the source of his corruption. If it was a natural formation of some kind, perhaps others exist and could be used to create a counterforce. These are desperate theories proposed by desperate researchers, but they represent something important: the refusal to accept that the situation is hopeless. The gods have not given up despite their fear and their knowledge of the prison's eventual failure. They continue to pour power into the chains. They continue to hunt his cults. They continue to search for solutions, alternatives, anything that might change the equation. Their determination is admirable and terrifying in equal measure, because it demonstrates both their commitment to existence and their understanding of how dire the situation truly is. In the mortal world, life continues largely unaware of this existential dread. Farmers plant crops, merchants conduct trade, nobles play political games, Adventurers seek glory and treasure. This ignorance is both tragic and necessary. If everyone knew the full truth about Tharizdun, if every mortal understood how close reality sits to annihilation at all times, civilization would collapse under the weight of that knowledge. So the gods keep their secrets, and most priests keep their secrets, and the world goes on pretending that existence is stable and secure and permanent. But you know now, you have looked into this particular abyss and seen the shape of cosmic horror that lurks in divine prisons. You understand that the world exists on borrowed time, maintained by the constant effort of gods who are slowly exhausting themselves in an unwinnable fight against entropy. This knowledge is a burden. It changes how you see reality. It makes every moment of joy or beauty or meaning seem more precious, because you understand how fragile it all is, how close to ending it perpetually stands. What you do with this knowledge is up to you. You could despair, could fall into the same trap that catches Tharizdun's cultists. If everything ends eventually, why does anything matter? But there is another perspective, one that the gods themselves appear to have adopted based on their continued efforts. Precisely because everything is temporary, precisely because existence is fragile and threatened and precious, every moment matters. Every act of creation is defiance against entropy. Every choice to build rather than destroy, to preserve rather than discard, to hope rather than despair. These are victories against Tharizdun's philosophy, even if they are temporary victories. The chains hold. Today, in this moment, in this timeline, the prison remains intact. Tharizdun writhes in his impossible cage, patient and terrible and waiting. The gods maintain their vigil, pouring power into seals, hunting cults, searching desperately for solutions they may never find. And you, mortal and finite and beautifully temporary, you have a choice. You can live knowing that existence is threatened, that reality itself is a precarious thing maintained by divine effort and cosmic fortune. You can fight against the darkness in whatever way you are capable, knowing that you might fail, that eventually everything might end, but choosing to struggle anyway because the struggle itself has meaning. Tharizdun is unique in the pantheons and cosmologies of the multiverse. Other gods of destruction exist, entities that embody endings and entropy and the dark side of existence, but none of them are quite like him based on what the sources describe. None of them want everything to end, including themselves. None of them are so fundamentally opposed to the concept of being that reality itself had to organize against them. He stands alone, the chained oblivion, the dark god, the thing that even evil itself fears, because he threatens to end evil along with everything else. His story is not over. The prison holds, but the story continues. Every day that passes is another day closer to whatever ending awaits. Will the gods find a solution? Will mortal heroes discover some unexpected answer? Will Tharizdun eventually break free and begin the final unmaking? Or will the chains hold forever, defying probability and mathematics, sustained by nothing but desperate divine will? The answer lies somewhere in the future, on a timeline that stretches across eons, in a story that began before most current gods existed and will continue long after most current mortals are dust. This is the truth of Tharizdun. This is the reality of the Chained Oblivion. Not a simple villain to be defeated in a single adventure. Not a problem that can be solved with enough power or cleverness, but a fundamental threat to existence itself. A weight that gods carry. A shadow that hangs over all creation. A reminder that nothing lasts forever. And that sometimes the greatest victory is simply surviving another day. If you found this deep dive into one of the darkest corners of divine lore enlightening, or terrifying, or both, consider subscribing to Lore D&D. Hit that like button if you appreciate having your understanding of reality thoroughly examined through the lens of ancient cosmic horrors. And remember, the next time you sleep peacefully, the next time you enjoy a moment of happiness or beauty or meaning, somewhere beyond the reach of mortal perception, gods are straining to maintain chains around something that wants all of that to stop existing.